Good afternoon. This is the Tuesday edition of E&E Weekly. I am Joycelyn Elakeche Ada. Our top stories. Federal government plans to convert cars and generators in Nigeria to run on gas from October. We would convince the Trade Union Congress not to go on strike, says the federal government. OPEC celebrates 60 and downgrades its outlook for the global oil market a few days before ministers' meeting. And on power, Nigeria poised for huge improvements in power supply as additional 126 megawatts set to be added to the national grid. These stories and more after this short break. You're watching Energy and Environment Weekly. This October, the federal government will commence an ambitious plan to convert more vehicles and generators in the country to run on gas instead of petrol. But only those cars in good condition will benefit. The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Chief Timothy Silva, who disclosed this, said the project will be done free of charge for all Nigerians to cushion the effect of the hike in pump price of petrol. Cars are capable of running on both gas and petrol. Therefore, the minister further explained that the move would reduce carbon emissions as well as the demand for premium motor spirit, otherwise known as petrol. Chief Silva stated that the alternative now is to introduce gas, which he said will be cheaper than the subsidized rate of petrol. He said that government will encourage Nigerians to convert their cars to dual fuel. What that means is that the cars will be able to run on either gas or petrol, and that will be done for free. The rollout plan for this project is within October. It is planned that filling stations owned by the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, would be the first to begin selling gas to vehicles. Chief Silva observed that the use of gas is cleaner and climate friendly, adding that once this is achieved, Nigeria would receive funding from foreign donors. At Nigerians' homes, even the very cheap generating sets, commonly referred to as "I pass my neighbor," will be made to connect to gas cylinders and run on gas instead of petrol. The minister praised the attempt to make the procedure become cheaper and cleaner to help reduce carbon emissions. He said all NNPC filling stations and some private sector marketers had signed on to the initiative, adding that the scheme would start in one part of the country and then spread to the others. However, it is stated by the minister that a car should be in a fairly good condition to benefit. The minister, who was speaking on NTA program Good Morning Nigeria, remarked that it is the only condition to be met. He explained that if a car is not in fairly good condition, it may be difficult to convert. The Dangote refinery, which begins operation next year, may not significantly reduce the price of petrol in the country. This is because the refinery will be selling at the international price. Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, who stated this, explained that the refinery is located at the export processing zone in Lagos. She said that Nigeria would only benefit from not paying shipping costs. The minister said this would enable the petroleum sector to grow. She further disclosed that there have been a number of refineries that have been licensed for several years. None of them was willing to start refining under the regime which fuel pricing was controlled. The situation now will encourage those that are supposed to have come to operative to now do so because they are assured that what they produce, they can sell at market rate and recover their investments and make some reasonable profits. She said the deregulation of the sector, which led to the increase in petrol price, was good for the economy as it would encourage investment in refineries. The Dangote refinery is expected to commence operations next year with a capacity of refining 650,000 barrels of crude oil per day. And meanwhile, the federal government says it will convince the Trade Union Congress, TUC, not to go on its planned strike scheduled for the 23rd of September in today's meeting. The union and the federal government will be meeting today, and discussions will be centered on a letter addressed to the president from the union dated 14th September 2020 and titled, "We Cannot Bear the Burden Any Longer." The letter is signed by the union president, Mr. Quadri Olaloye, and Secretary General, Mr. Musa Lawal. In the letter, the union gave the federal government a 7-day ultimatum to reverse the recent increase in electricity tariff and price of petrol. The spokesman, Ministry of Labor, Mr. Charles Akpan, said they would give the reasons for the hike in electricity tariff and PMS known as petrol, and hopefully the union won't embark on the planned strike after these reasons are shared. We'll take a break now. When we return, we take a look at OPEC, which is celebrating 60 years of formation. Stay with us.
My name is Abbas G. Idris. I am the Director General, FCT Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. I would like to appeal to the residents of the FCT. Based on the experts' prediction, we are going to witness more flooding in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, and its environment. We are therefore calling on all residents to observe this simple precaution, avoiding dumping refuse in the waterways, avoiding blockage of the drainages, avoiding buildings on the floodplains, and of course, avoiding driving or walking in a running water whenever it rains. This is very serious. We have been experiencing loss of lives and properties in the FCT as a result of this neglect. And I am appealing to the residents of the FCT that we should try as much as possible to take necessary precautions. Where there is any danger, you should not hesitate to call on 112. That is the toll-free emergency number for our rescue team to come for your assistance. Again, if you know that you are residing in a flood-prone area, please evacuate with immediate effect to a higher ground. Go to nearby friends, neighbors, or relations that you can be able to save your life and that of your family. It is necessary, as the saying goes, a stitch in time saves 9. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to Energy and Environment Weekly. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, is celebrating its 60th anniversary. OPEC countries account for 40% of the world's oil and hold 80% of its reserves, at a time where some are forecasting the impending end of the oil age. Here is a short video on the formation and the journey so far.
On the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, in the historical land of Mesopotamia, a cradle of civilization, OPEC was born. It happened on September 14, 1960 in Al-Shab Hall in Baghdad, with no fanfare and no glare from the international media. OPEC's development over the past 6 decades has not been a straight line, but with 60 years of institutional wisdom and a brilliant history, it is a mature, dependable, and essential partner in energy governance. Today, OPEC holds meetings of the conference with its ministers, as well as ministerial OPEC and non-OPEC meetings at least twice a year to vigilantly follow market changes and make educated and cooperative decisions in support of market stability. Additionally, it holds regular technical meetings and dialogues with an increasing number of partners. From the initial 5 founder members, today OPEC has grown to include 13 sovereign nations on 3 continents. Together, these countries hold 80% of the world's proven oil reserves and provide around 40% of global crude oil production. The impulse for OPEC came in response to the activities and practices of the 7 Sisters. These were large international oil companies dominated by the established industrial powers.
Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, Texaco, Gulf, British Petroleum, and Royal Dutch Shell.
Oil-producing countries relied on them for oil revenues and wanted to exercise their inalienable right to permanent sovereignty over their natural resources in the interest of their national growth and development. The formation of OPEC was, in this sense, a pioneering act. The real spark came after the powerful international oil companies decided to reduce the posted price for a barrel of oil without asking the host governments. This led to a very quiet meeting on the sidelines of the first Arab Petroleum Congress at the Mahdi Yacht Club in Cairo in April 1959 with representatives of OPEC's 5 founding members: Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Here, a gentleman's agreement, the precursor to OPEC, was endorsed. Few could predict the powerful impact this meeting would have on the future of the oil industry and indeed the world. Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso of Venezuela, Abdullah al-Tareki of Saudi Arabia, Dr. Talat al-Shaybani of Iraq, Dr. Fouad Rahani of Iran, and Ahmed Sayed Omar of Kuwait joined together over a year later on a fateful September day in 1960 and created OPEC. For its first 5 years, OPEC was headquartered in Geneva. But in 1965, it moved to elegant, historic Vienna. The original host agreement was signed by Ashraf Lutfi, then OPEC Secretary General, and Dr. Bruno Kreisky, the Austrian foreign minister at the time.
The full video of that documentary will be aired on ASO television. All you have to do is stay tuned to this station. Meanwhile, OPEC has downgraded its outlook for the global oil market a few days before ministers meet. This move follows a faltering demand and signs of a recovery in supply from U.S. shale drillers. OPEC added 760,000 barrels a day to global markets in August, just as its analysts were revising down demand for its crude by more than 1 million barrels a day. OPEC and its allies will hold an online monitoring meeting on Thursday to assess whether the vast production curbs they've been making are still sufficient to stave off an oil glut as the resurgence of coronavirus batters the world economy. Oil prices slipped further $40 a barrel in London on Monday, close to their lowest in more than 2 months, as companies from BP plc to Trafigura group made ominous predictions about consumptions. OPEC Plus, the 23-nation alliance spanning cartel nations like Saudi Arabia and non-OPEC members such as Russia, had agreed to taper some of the supply cutbacks made during the depths of the pandemic amid expectations that economic activity was recovering. This month's report from the organization's secretariat in Vienna suggests the move might have been premature demand collapse. OPEC reduced forecasts for global oil demand for each quarter to the end of next year by an average of 768,000 barrels a day. As a result, consumption is on the track to collapse by an unprecedented 9.46 million barrels a day in 2020, averaging 90.23 million a day. The group simultaneously raised projections for production outside OPEC over the next 5 quarters by an average of 394,000 barrels a day, mostly because of a stronger outlook for the U.S. The combination of the softer consumption forecast and more robust non-OPEC supply numbers depresses the requirements for crude from the cartel. The organization revised down estimated demand for its crude next year by 1.1 million barrels a day to 28.2 million a day. While OPEC is producing far below this level because of its agreement to curb supply, the revisions indicate that the world's bloated oil inventories will subside more slowly than previously thought. The group's 13 members pumped an average of just over 24 million barrels a day in August, the report showed. To satisfy demand in the coming months, they would need to produce more than 28 million barrels a day, and the same for much of 2021, suggesting that inventories should still decline substantially. The organization, which has shaped global oil markets from the Arab nations' embargo of 1973 to the record supply cuts of this year's pandemic, turned 60 on Monday. The decade ahead could bring a further test. And UK energy giant BP said the relentless growth of oil demand is over, becoming the 4th super major to call the end of an era many thought would last another decade or even more. Oil consumption may never return to levels seen before the coronavirus crisis took hold, the company said in a Monday report. Let's now take a look at the current global market listing. That's a price listing for OPEC member countries. And moving on, Iran says it will continue to support OPEC as long as the group protects Iranian interests alongside other members. Iran's OPEC governor, Amir Hossein Somonina, said 60 years after its formation, OPEC's founding members, Iran and Venezuela, have been sidelined by U.S. sanctions, while its kingpin, Saudi Arabia, has shown it would rather appease Washington than risk losing U.S. support. Mr. Somonina said that all OPEC members should denounce in words and in practice use of oil as a political tool for imposition of sanctions and pressures on producing countries. Iran's share of OPEC output has nearly halved to 7.5% since 2010, while Venezuela's has collapsed to 2.3% from almost 10%. According to Reuters calculations based on OPEC data, Saudi Arabia's share, meanwhile, has risen 7 percentage points to 35%. The Iranian governor remarked that he believed remaining in OPEC and strengthening the organization was currently in Iran's interest. To tackle a drop in demand, OPEC and its allies, a group known as OPEC Plus, agreed to record supply cut of 9.7 million barrels per day that started on May 1st, 2020, while the United States and other nations said they would pump less. In August, OPEC Plus eased its cuts to 7.7 million barrels a day as demand partially recovered. The OPEC Plus Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee, JMMC, meets on Thursday to discuss the performance of the deal so far. OPEC said on Monday world oil demand will fall more steeply in 2020 than previously forecast due to the coronavirus and recover more slowly than expected next year, potentially making it harder for the group and its allies to support the market. And away from OPEC, the British petroleum giant BP plc says global oil demand might have already peaked and will likely not stop falling for the next 30 years. This is the hit by virus fallout and moves towards greener energy. At the same time, OPEC has revised its forecast for global demand lower this year and next for essentially the same reasons. BP plc has therefore become one of the first super major to call an end of an era for oil boom many thought it would last another decade or more. BP plc says oil consumption may never return to levels seen before the coronavirus crisis took hold. BP said in a report on Monday, even if its most bullish scenario sees demand no better than broadly flat for the next 2 decades as the energy transition shifts the world away from fossil fuel. From the bosses of corporate energy giants to ministers from OPEC states, senior figures from the industry have insisted that oil consumption will see decades of growth time and again. They have described it as the only commodity that can satisfy the demands of an increasing global population and expanding middle class. The UK giant is describing a different future where oil supremacy is challenged and ultimately fades. That explains why BP has taken the boldest steps so far among peers to align its business with the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. Just 6 months after taking the top job, Chief Executive Officer Bernard Looney said in August he'll shrink oil and gas output by 40% over the next decade and spend as much as $5 billion a year building one of the world's largest renewable power businesses. That's because he suspects oil use may already have peaked as a result of the pandemic, stricter government policies, and changes in consumer behavior. BP's energy outlook shows consumption slumping 50% by 2050 in one scenario and by almost 80% in another scenario. In a business as usual situation, demand would recover, but then flatline near 100 million barrels a day for the next 20 years. BP isn't the only big oil adapting to its business to the energy transaction. Royal Dutch Shell plc, Total, and others in Europe have announced similar pivots towards cleaner operations as customers, governments, and investors increasingly call for change. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, it's the power sector. Stay with us. Welcome to Energy and Environment Weekly. Now to the power sector. Nigeria is poised for huge improvement in power supply network as additional 126 megawatts of electricity are set to be added to the national grid within 2 months. This development is following the completion of work on the second gas turbine of the Gbarian Power Station in Yenagoa, Bayelsa State. Power generation on Nigeria's grid currently hovers between 4,000 megawatts and 5,000 megawatts, which analysts say may need expansion to support growth and industrialization of Africa's largest economy. The Nigerian government has been making efforts to grow its grid capacity to 25,000 megawatts in 5 years, as the federal government and Siemens are currently implementing projects to actualize this. Also, findings from the Niger Delta Power Holding Company shows that one of the gas turbines of the Gbarian plant, which was partially completed by Roxon Engineering, has been finally erected and ready to supply power to the grid. The managing director, NDPHC, Mr. Chedu Ugbo, explained that the Gbarian Power Station was one of the 4 power stations hitherto awarded to Roxon Engineering. He said some of the stations, such as Gbarian and Alauji, were partially completed, while others, such as Egbema and Omoku, were not completed at all. Mr. Ugbo stated that the NDPHC had terminated the deal with Roxon and was carrying out procurement for some of the stations. The second unit erection has now been completed and undergoing commissioning to ensure that it is working before bringing it to the grid. The company also announced that it has started the transmission projects connecting Ngalagu, Abakaliki, and other distribution projects in Afikpo, where the CSP transformers on 11 kV lines were installed in Enugu State. Mr. Ugbo said the NDPHC was in discussions with the Enugu Distribution Company to enhance power supply to the network through the eligible customer arrangement. He said this step would address the issue of stranded power in the southeast region and ultimately increase revenue to NDPHC. According to the NDPHC, was another engaging contractor to finish the construction of Egbema and Omoku power stations. The NDPHC manages the National Integrated Power Project, which is owned by the 3 tiers of government. And that's our package for today. Don't forget to join us on Thursday for fresh stories from energy and environment sector. I am Joycelyn Elakeche Ada. Thanks for watching.